Welcome to another episode of the Boring AppSec podcast. Today, we're chatting with Varun Badhwar, founder and CEO of Endor Labs. Endor isn't Varun's first startup. He co-founded two other companies, one of which, Redlock, was acquired by Palo Alto Networks. In this conversation, we talk about building companies, going through acquisitions, why he chose AppSec for his latest venture, and much more. Varun is articulate and great fun to chat with. We had a great time recording this, and I'm sure you'll like it. Listen in. Varun, it's great to have you on the show.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Anshuman and Sandesh. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Same here. Can you tell us a little bit about what Endor Labs does before we kind of dive into the questions?
Yeah, speaking of the boring AppSec program, Endor Labs wants to bring fun and excitement into AppSec again. We specifically operate in the code security realm. And, the biggest takeaway for me in the last 3.5 years of building this company has been that you go survey 9 out of 10 people do not like the existing tooling they use for code scanning. Their tools are noisy, they distract developers from the real problems. They're all great at telling you about problems, not finding you actual answers and help you remediating the risk. And most importantly, most AppSec programs are struggling from friction, tension, and distrust between development teams and AppSec teams because both teams feel like they're speaking past each other. So, we are trying to build a code security platform that lets AppSec practitioners go home at 5 o'clock and have great relationships with their development teams by taking out the noise, focusing on really the things that matter through automation and not through having 7 engineers dedicated to triaging issues that many of our customers do. And ultimately, helping customers and development teams fix all of these problems. And a lot of this is oriented towards the new world of software development, which is more software assembly, where your developers write less code of their own, but they rely mostly on code that was open source so far. But looking forward and around the corner, most of the code will be produced by AI that is trained on open source models. So fundamentally, that problem doesn't go away. But the orientation of the code and how it will look and feel may not be libraries. It might be 17 lines of code that seem to be copied off of Log4j library, but you just don't know that. So, we're really kind of building this for an AI-generated code era that we're about to step into.
No, that's great to hear. Before we'll get into code security a lot more, but before we do that, I find it kind of your background very interesting. I think this is your third company that you started, right? And the first 2 companies were kind of in the infrastructure and the kind of the cloud space. And the current one focuses, obviously, like you mentioned, a lot more on AppSec, right? This is kind of interesting to me because I feel like, 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago, there were a lot more people focusing on AppSec, and a lot of the focus has moved away from AppSec into CloudSec. But you seem to be kind of coming back in the reverse direction, right? So what do you think about that? I mean, when the cloud first came into the scene, the hypothesis of a lot of folks, including me, was that, hey, all of CloudSec is also going to become AppSec because all of infrastructure is now, orchestrated through code. But that hasn't really happened, right? If you see the rise of Wiz or Palo Alto or a bunch of other cloud security platforms, a lot of the movement is in that direction, right? What are your thoughts on that, and kind of why you chose the AppSec space after kind of working so long in cloud infra and those spaces?
Yeah, look, I characterize myself as a student of the business. If you look at what's common between CipherCloud, Redlock, and Endor Labs, in all 3 cases, we were looking at tectonic shifts happening in technology. CipherCloud, it was the adoption of SaaS back in 2010. What would that mean to security architectures? 2015, it was Redlock with, cloud, AWS, Azure becoming your data centers of the future. And I think similarly, with what we're seeing here with software development, as I mentioned, there's a radical shift in how we produce software. And, moving forward, we're probably going to have 5x more code produced by the same number of developers, except the AppSec teams aren't about to get 5x more headcount. And to your point, how did I understand this problem? Summer of 2021, I was running a 450-person engineering team building and scaling up Prisma Cloud. When SolarWinds happened, it was the first of everybody paying attention to better understanding what application security, or using the buzzword software supply chain security, meant. And just looking at the tooling we use internally, as I was preparing a readout for our kind of board and management team, it was very clear we ran tools for the sake of checking compliance boxes. Most developers don't action on that data because it's not actionable for the most part. And to me, that was really where the problem arose, especially we keep talking about shift left, and we were talking about shift left in the context of cloud and containers. But really, like, you got to go shift left to IDEs and developers producing code. And where do they source the code from? Can you give them the right metrics and telemetry and information for them to prevent poor code from even getting checked into a pull request way before it becomes a part of a container getting ready to be deployed in the cloud? And I think the world's going to have two platforms. I think there's going to be a platform that secures your SDLC. This is everything from the IDE till there's a deployable container, call it that. And then there's going to be, okay, I have a deployable artifact. Now let's secure it moving into the cloud. And I think that's where CNAPP is. Obviously, I'm happy to have built something as great as Prisma Cloud to really define the CNAPP movement. But I think the equivalent of a CNAPP is now needed for software supply chain and software assurance. And that's what we're looking to build here with Endor Labs.
No, that's great. A couple of things come to mind, right? So one, I think, a lot of the thought process starts with the IDE, but sometimes even before the IDE, like even thinking about the design process, etc. So I think I agree with you. That's probably starts with design and then goes all the way to deployment. The other thought that keeps coming to mind these days is that, especially with supply chain security or software composition analysis, is that the one weird thing about third-party code is that you may have no vulnerabilities when you deployed this open source package, but 6 months later, the same open source package has new vulnerabilities, right? So that kind of makes it a little weird, because now, is that like code security, like SDLC security, or is that something you're looking at in production? So what are your thoughts in general about a lot of these areas like ADR, etc., where you're saying, hey, it's like AppSec, but software related, but kind of meets production, right? So, yeah.
Look, if I had all the money in the world, I would buy one of everything, because you kind of need it, right? They kind of solve different parts of the problem. But I'll give you a different analogy. Like, we talk about software being software assembly. Let's talk about it in the context of car assembly lines. If you're producing cars in a factory, if you can uncover potential problems on the machine line as cars are being moved, way cheaper to address the problem there than issuing a recall. Unfortunately, go ask Tesla how many recalls they've done on Cybertrucks recently, but how expensive are recalls? To me, ADR ultimately is great at catching things that were missed, but they're going to lead to recalls and extremely expensive remediation efforts. Whereas if you can catch these things early, if you have the right signals to do it, you could prevent recalls, in which case that would be a much more efficient model for you to have. So again, like I think a customer ideally could have both, but I think the bigger question to me is, we spoke about cloud security, how many agents am I going to convince my dev teams, whether it's eBPF or not, pick whatever fancy terminology, kernel modules, user space modules, how many things am I going to deploy? And I feel like there's going to be consolidation in runtime. My belief, CrowdStrike and Wiz and Prisma agents will do more and more of the stack, including the application layer, ADR-like capabilities. And you're going to need more and more consolidation in secure software assurance platforms as well, or code security platforms. And so ultimately, I think you're going to have one big platform on this side, ideally, one big platform in cloud, consolidating a lot of these capabilities.
That makes sense. Anshuman, did you have something for Varun?
Yeah. Not necessarily on this topic, but yeah, just wanting to dig a little bit deep into some of your previous experiences of, building companies and having them acquired. So, curious to know, like for folks who are just trying to start their own companies in the cybersecurity space, if you can share any of the learnings from your experience of, the acquisition of Redlock by Palo Alto Networks. Like, what are some things that you would do it again, or some things that you wouldn't do or you would change about that experience?
Yeah, let's maybe split it. I think there's two pretty loaded questions in there. One is around, what should founders think about when they're starting a company? The other is like the acquisition experience. We'll touch on the second one later. Look, I think there's a few things that are important to characterize about the security market. I meet a lot of people, by the way, that want to come into security. They've never been in security, but they want to build and sell security products because from the outside, they believe there's a lot of money being spent here. And I always tell them, like, if you haven't felt the practitioner pain it's very hard to empathize with what's going on, both as a builder of products, but also as a buyer of products, because, they come in and they say, gosh, first time I walked the RSA hall and oh my God, there's too many cybersecurity companies. I'm like, that's reality, right? Like you should have known that when you came into this space. There's the second piece is, as techies, all of us, the first thing we want to do is build the deepest technology stack that can solve the hardest problem. And sometimes you forget and overlook that some of the problems we face in the industry are still foundational problems. They're the basics. They're back to visibility. They're back to kind of alert prioritization. They're back to remediation. You get into advanced threat detection and things like that. People will get to it later. The third thing is unfortunate reality. I wish the industry didn't work this way, but unless something ties nicely to a compliance driver, chances are it's way lower on the priority list. People just don't have the time to get to it. So I think those are things that we as practitioners in the industry can empathize with, but a lot of outsiders wanting to build security companies miss some of those foundational elements. So I think those are some things to keep in mind. The last thing is, it's not the technology building that's the hardest part. I think building distribution at scale is the hardest part. I mean, I think 99% of startups in cybersecurity will be like sub 2 or 3 million ARR. Maybe 1% of the companies will get beyond that to have reasonable product market fit and ability to scale. And I think that's because you're thinking too much as founders early about the product, the tech, and missing the part of the consumability of this tech, the adoption and the deployability of this tech. So those are some things in no particular order. I can have a whole session with you all talking about how to build distribution and go to market, but we'll spare the details for now. As it relates to your second question around acquisitions, another thing, right? 9 out of 10 cybersecurity acquisitions fail. If you look back, right, how many acquisitions has Cisco done, Checkpoint, even Palo Alto Networks pre-Nikesh's time, some successes, some failures, but generally speaking, you'll commonly, like, founders will say, oh God, I don't want to get acquired to die, right? Like that's a common thing. And I think what I found with Prisma Cloud and how we oriented this, and credit to, Nikesh and his way of thinking, but also collectively what the organization was able to do, is we recognized that in order to sell cloud security, which was a different technology, different sales motion, different buyer, you really had to kind of keep the spirit of Redlock alive collectively, because the first thing that most acquirers do is, let's say you acquired a company with 100 people. There's 30 of them in engineering. Okay, 30 people in engineering move into a 3,000 person engineering org, get lost. 10 people in sales go into a 2,000 person sales organization, get lost. And so you kind of break the entire spirit of a working cohesive group, and leads to kind of 90% failures. You just get lost in a large org, right? How am I going to go get 1,000, 2,000 sellers who make tons of money selling firewalls to pay attention to this new thing that they have to learn how to sell again that they don't pay attention to? So I think what, Prisma Cloud did right, what Palo Alto did right, was allow us the ability to run this essentially as a separate business unit, which is why we were able to take it from 0 to 300 million ARR in 3 years and really set it up for the success it has. And I would challenge and say, like, that success led to the kind of fundraising Wiz and others could do. Great product, like, kudos to Wiz for what they built. But, it was on the tailwinds of what Prisma Cloud was showing was the market opportunity. So the way we did it is scaling fairly independently. The second thing was we had a thesis, which proved right, is you cannot have a platform story with mediocre products under the hood, right? So, take, for example, let's draw two comparisons, right? Sneak bought a company called Fugue for cloud security. They believed they had distribution in the world, and they believed they could tuck in something. How many people use Fugue or Sneak for cloud security today, right? That answers the question. Versus Palo Alto Networks bought Redlock. They then bought Twistlock for container security. These were not cheap acquisitions, but they were best in their categories for what they were doing. And if you take best of breed products and can then add the value of a platform, integrated purchase, integrated technology, now you've actually solved a real problem for customers. Because as practitioners, I mean, come on, will you trade a really good technology for somebody checking some boxes? Likely not, right? And I think that's the mistake a lot of companies have made as they've tried to define a platform is they make one or two of these trade-offs. They don't get both right, best of breed and integrated. So my experience was great. Long story short, It is very rare that that happens, and I wish more and more larger companies understand the power of keeping the entities that you acquire together, letting those acquired founders run those businesses until you hit critical mass and scale. Of course, at some point you want to bring it together, but a 5 million ARR company broken up and brought together versus 100, 200, 500 million ARR business coming together, way different. And so I think those are things to pay attention to.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. So I kind of was at Digital for a long time, which then got acquired by Synopsys. And then Synopsys, as you know, acquired like a company every year for a few years, right, to build a application security portfolio. And what you were saying was bang on, right? So every year the sales folks had a new thing to sell. And then the old sales team gets merged with the new sales team, and that cohesive unit kind of goes away. Having said that, the Digital team, the original Digital team which got acquired, is still like a very close-knit bunch, right? So even though it's been like 8 years since we got acquired, so I'm with you that like keeping that unit cohesive would have been the best thing to do to kind of let us run and then find a way to platformize it, right? So totally understand where you're coming from. Since you spoke about platform and best of breed, right? I mean, and I know this is kind of like a debate unto death on this, on every freaking security podcast in the world, right? But I guess the one question I do have is that, from a distribution perspective, is it simpler to sell platforms? Is that something that you see often? Or at least as a practitioner, when I was running security at Razorpay, I mean, I didn't really care about the platform aspect. Everything's connected through APIs. You have a business intelligence tool anyway. So what's really the value of the platform was my thought process as an operator. But obviously every company is different, right? So what do you see in the market, right? Is there like a value with platformization, or is it just a bunch of best of breed tools working together which gives you the market share?
I think the answer is somewhere in the middle. I'll give you an example, right? Like a couple of weeks ago, we announced Microsoft has integrated and embedded Endor Labs into Microsoft Defender for Cloud, their CNAP. And, we think that's a great outcome for customers, because if you as a customer choose to have kind of a code security platform that's best of breed, and you choose Endor Labs, and by the way, you choose Microsoft Azure for CNAP, then these products are natively integrated for you. You don't have to do the work. So to me, we need to, as an industry, deliver easy integrations and platforms, but I don't think the platform has to be built by one company, because that is where it is impossible for one company. Look, Wiz announced Wiz Code. Great. It's great. For people who want to check some boxes, it'll be fine. But for people that have used, best of breed code scanning tools, in order for them to get more value, they want something even better, not something that's mediocre and integrated, right? So to me, I think the industry, we as entrepreneurs and CEOs need to come together and do a much better job of making sure all of these technologies interoperate well out of the box, and take that work away from customers. But I also think it's a mistake for customers to, for the sake of simplicity in purchasing or integrating, have mediocre capabilities under the hood. And I think the, it's a bit art and a bit scientific, but you got to get both, right? In an ideal world, as a buyer, I want a self-driving car, and I actually want that car to be fun to drive and actually be safe. If you said, great, I can give you a self-driving car, but it kind of sucks to be inside, and the interior sucks, and I don't feel great sitting in there, and it's not safe, I don't know if I want that platform.
If I can add to this, I think there's always something to say about the other side of the story, where me as an AppSec engineer who sort of is in the weeds every day, right? I think for me, the way I think about platform or tools that can combine into one giant platform is just kind of the ease of integration. So what I mean by that is, even if there are two, the two tools that are best in their class, but if they still cannot operate with each other, if I cannot consume the results from tool one and then feed it as an input to tool two, I think as a platform, that concept gets lost as an idea for me to implement in my day-to-day job. However, if there are multiple mediocre tools, right, and if they somehow work well with each other, and even if that means I can get the compliance checkboxes accomplished with those mediocre tools and build my own platform, even if I'm not paying a vendor to provide me that platform, I think there's still some value there. Curious to know, Varun, how do you think about, sort of building companies building their own platform by combining multiple tools as opposed to, buying a platform from a vendor that already has those integrations built in?
Yeah, and I think the third piece to your point, right? If you have to go buy different tools and you have to integrate and they don't work well together, that's onus on you. And that's the piece I said we as vendors have to take away from the customer and make it our problem to solve. Look, I think to your point, it's a question of what maturity level you are at and what are you trying to build towards. I think some customers that are in the stage one, holy shit, we're just starting an AppSec program and my executive team needs us to have these 3 compliance mandates done in the next 6 months. My auditors are going to be here in 2 months, 3 months. I'm looking for the easiest checkbox to pass the audits, right? However, at a certain point, this goes back to my thesis of why I started Endor Labs. Great, we had that, but nobody was doing anything with it. So when you want to start actually improving the security posture of your organization, chances are that those tools are going to be too noisy, or they're not going to have enough context. It's not going to help you remedy things faster. Your development teams will say, you're bringing me all these tickets, like you're wasting, there's a research, I think IDC just posted 10 hours a week on average, $28,000 a year per engineer spent on just managing and maintaining open source repository, like open source libraries and SCA, right? That's the tax on a developer. So when you get to a point where now you're having a bottom line conversation of what value did you, the security team, bring to the organization besides the compliance checkboxes, there'll be blank stares in the room unless you can really show incremental value. And I think fundamentally, most AppSec teams need to start thinking about themselves as not just what did I do for compliance and risk reduction, but what am I doing now to enable my business to run faster, to ship product faster? And I think if every single morning we wake up and ask ourselves that question as introspection, what am I doing the week? What am I doing next week? That will help us drive faster, be more innovative as a company while being secure. I think we're going to end up with the right outcomes as an industry. I think if we kind of orient ourselves too much to audit-centric outcomes, then yeah, we'll be fine. But I don't know if the risk will improve in the industry as a whole.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. Unfortunately, I think based on my personal experience, compliance always takes a priority. So even as me practitioner, if I'm trying to make a case for a vendor product that I think will provide value to me as to me and my team, more often than not, what I've seen is the question gets asked is how is it going to help us in the compliance story, and then if there's not a compelling case, then so I hear you. I think that makes a lot of sense.
In fact, a lot of our conversations now with customers are exactly that. How will Endor Labs help you accelerate FedRAMP and do it more efficiently? How will Endor Labs help you meet the NIST Secure by Design or CISA Secure by Design kind of mandates that you have now, amazingly committed and put a pledge on? How do you want to get the SALSA level 3? Great. What are the controls and automation you can bring? Because to your point, in a sales and go-to-market perspective, we have to be able to sell you that value, because that's how your organization will find funding and prioritize this.
Yeah, that's right. So, Nilesh, do you have any follow-up questions to that?
I mean, not really a follow-up question, but just a comment that in the end, compliance is kind of like a sales enablement for an operator too, right? You can't sell to other customers if you're not compliant, right? So therefore, when I'm buying a cybersecurity product, the primary goal may be compliance, but at some point, the cost of bad security catches up with you. And I think that's kind of when there's kind of like a shift in the curve of, folks really caring about security. Just switching gears a little bit, something you said kind of like caught my eye, right? So Vivek Ramchandran, who's the founder of SquareX and Pentest Academy, said something very interesting. I hope I'm not misquoting it, but I did hear him say it, that, first-time founders focus on product, second-time founders focus on distribution, and third-time founders focus first on finance and legal, right? And you spoke a little bit about kind of like thinking about distribution as well. So, I mean, what recommendations do you have to founders, first-time founders like me, though I've been an operator for a long time, to kind of think about this product versus distribution angle, right? Especially in an industry like cybersecurity, which is so global in nature, and has so many different industries to kind of cater.
Yeah, I certainly agree with his first two motions. I'm not sure I agree with the third one, which is on the third time focus on finance and ops, because you try to optimize too much on expenses and operating model, you lose sight of what you're trying to do. I think there's a place and time to do that. But yeah, generally belief is, start thinking about customer adoption and work backwards. Like if versus saying, hey, like, look, I see this problem. Like, I can really build this hard technology, like this complex piece of technology that can catch every thread in the network. But it's like, if you look at the bell curve, like, how many security incidents still start with a phishing attack or social engineering attack, right? And so security is still about the basics, or secrets being leaked, or, vulnerabilities being exploited. It's not advanced malware. Like, look, I sell a product where customers want to know about catching, malware in open source libraries. Yes, it is a problem. It is a problem we solve for. But how many times does a customer want to buy my product for that versus 99% of the times it's vulnerability, compliance drivers, blah, blah, blah. So start with the customer buyer perspective. And I would say don't lose sight of both UX and DX. If you are building a product that's at the heart of software engineering or a shift left product, the user experience for the AppSec persona, very important. But even more important is the developer experience. And the best AppSec products today are AppSec products that the developers don't even know are operating under the hood. So my thesis is, they should be natively integrated into your Git workflow. Like, you should never, as a software developer, have to log into Endor Labs platform to see stuff. The data needs to surface where you're working. So I would say that the distribution, but I would extend to usability aspects of the product, because if you have ease of use and you think about how are people going to adopt it, how am I going to scale it in my enterprise, right? I'll give you an example. First year of Endor Labs, when we built reachability analysis, we said, like, you got to put this in your CI/CD pipeline. And once you do it, that's the perfect place to look at all the build, and you have all the metadata and insights to have the most accurate scan. True statement. But if you go into an enterprise and think about how many pipelines they have, and yes, in theory, an AppSec engineer should just be able to plug something in. That's not how it works, right? And so, the second year of our company, we spent all the time in the world about how to make the apps, the agentless scans, whether it's a GitHub app, GitLab app, Bitbucket app, work without knowing the exact build environment, right? Like, now we're trying to simulate without knowing what the build environment is, but we still want to be accurate. So we press really hard and push boundaries on innovation to solve the usability aspect. So to me, start with a usable product versus a more accurate product generally wins. So that's one thing. And yeah, distribution, like, how do I get it, right? There's 5,000 companies vying for the attention of folks like yourself, Anshuman, on the other side, to get you to take a call in the demo. But a lot of what you want to buy is you're buying from what your peers are telling you they're doing, and you're buying based on your reading content, right? You're a self-aware buyer that wants to understand the technology, understand the technical merits. And, I think all of us have seen how much vaporware exists in the cybersecurity industry for marketing, right? We coined the term, not coined, but we essentially made reachability analysis a core requirement for SCA. Now, every SCA RFP out there generally has that as a requirement, but there's 7, 10, 15 vendors. Everybody claims reachability. Now, you dig into the details, you'll get the answers pretty quickly about how good reachability is for the other folks, but it's there, right? So how do you, as a buyer, buy through that noise? And I think for us, for example, a lot of our marketing is content written by technical engineers on our side, not marketing folks, right? So because you want to study that, understand that. We also think communities are important. For those of you that are not familiar, we have a community called Lean AppSec, where the idea is, as the name suggests, like, AppSec's a lonely job. You're typically very few people in a very large enterprise. How do you kind of, punch above your weight class? We think there's a lot of CISO communities out there, but we want AppSec practitioners to have a community where they can share best practices, understanding. We kind of, moderate a Slack forum as part of Lean AppSec, but we also hold Lean AppSec quarterly events, virtual, that people can sign up for. You all can come speak, other folks come speak. It's an education platform. So my point is, distribution is not hard-fought selling and cold calling your cell phone. It's you wanting to speak to us because you have, for the last several months, been reading our content. You have a problem. It's resonating. You believe the technical merits of our approach. And that's how you're going to go build trust with a vendor and acquire technology.
Cool. So we think AppSec is boring and you think AppSec is lonely. That's interesting. Anyway.
A bit of both.
Sorry, Anshuman, did you? They're both okay. Do you have a question?
Yeah. No. So, so, we see that Endor Labs is creating waves in the security industry. You've been a founder and CEO since the past 3 years or so. One particular post that caught my attention was the auto fixing open source libraries during the build process, right? And there are also a bunch of other features that were pretty interesting as well. In particular, the secrets being valid or not. I think uh, saying with confidence whether a secret found by a code security tool, goes a long way, because I've tried to build a secret finding tool myself. I know how difficult it is to first be able to figure out what is a secret versus what is not a secret, and then being able to figure out if it is actually worth fixing or not. So you go and try to prove its validity and all of that stuff. I feel like these problems are pretty complex, right, in terms of how they surface in big enterprises and organizations. And I think having the context, the right context, be made available to any AppSec practitioner and engineer to be able to make a decision of how to triage whether something is worth fixing or not is very important. And from my personal experience, I feel like this context is missing from most of the big scale vendor tools, right? So I'm curious to know, to hear from you, like, what are your thoughts around, these complex problems, and how do you think about providing context as much as possible to, practitioners, to engineers, to be able to make an informed decision of what do they want to do about it?
It's a great question, right? And unfortunately, most security companies, and the reason I said 9 out of 10 code security platforms are disliked by their users is because they checked some boxes. They didn't pay attention to actual experience, usability. And the part I mentioned initially, you said, like, what is Endor Labs? I said, we want to be the code security platform that lets AppSec engineers go home at 5 o'clock and spend time with families. We believe automation to drive down a lot of noise in the system is the only way to do it. So let's talk about the detection pieces you were asking about, the noise reduction, then we'll talk about the remediation as well. So if I think of it as a funnel problem, right? Which is first and foremost, I need to have the most accurate bill of materials of what's happening in my software. The industry of software composition analysis, or SCA, has primarily just focused on your packages from Maven, PyPy, NPM. The reality is, think about how many things your code depends on that your developers didn't write. Now there's Hugging Face with 1 million models. That aren't they dependencies? Like, why would you treat them differently? What about GitHub Actions? GitHub Actions bring arbitrary code that is TypeScript in most cases that brings in dependencies. Why is your SCA tool not catching it? Should it not? So in principle, first and foremost, we want to be able to bring in the coverage of everything your code depends on, and not just the old-fashioned terminology of what is a dependency, right? So we got to fix that, and that will give you a more accurate bill of material of what's going on in your environment. Great. So you solve that funnel, which is, oh my God, now I have a lot of visibility. The next piece happens is, well, if I keep scanning the old-fashioned way, now I'm going to have a shit ton of alerts, pardon the French. But, if I just hold you guilty by association to any package, any library in your code base without understanding how you use it, I have too much. So we built reachability analysis. We understand the entire call graph of your code, where we know every line of code and how it's accessible from your first-party code to your third-party code. And yes, it's a hard problem. But, we didn't shy away from hiring the best people in the business, whether they're people that build these tools internally at Meta, GitHub, Microsoft. Almost 25% of our engineers are PhDs and world-renowned experts. If you look at like Google Scholar with their names, they're the people that have worked for decades in the space in various forms and fashion. We brought them together and we've given them a platform to solve these hard problems at scale. So we did not take shortcuts. And I would say generally the trade-off has been, oh my God, if I get this level of accuracy and fidelity of information, it'll be too slow or too hard to deploy. We've tried to bring all three things together in one where you don't make those compromises. So great, we solved that problem. Then we gave you, on average, our customers get 92% less alerts compared to incumbent tools that they replace with Endor Labs. Great, but what we found then is even when you only had 8% of your 1 million alerts to fix, that's still a lot of work for developers. And we went and tried to better understand what is it about it that's hard, right? Because if you believe what I call the Dependabot model, if you're a modern kind of environment, Dependabot tells you upgrade to latest, you click the PR, auto PR approved and go. But it's not so simple. And why it's not so simple is none of these tools do an impact assessment. If you hit the button and approve the PR, here are the API breaking changes that would be introduced. Here's what would happen with your code that needs to be tested for or accounted for. Nobody does that, right? So we we marginalize the developer's work in some ways. It's offensive to them to say, hey, I said I use Sneak and it gave me an auto PR. Didn't I just do your job? It's like, no, because you didn't understand the impact of clicking the yes button and approve button, right? So the third part that we've been really invested in is remediation. And for that, we think, one, you need to do this impact assessment work for engineers, right? So if I move from version 1 to version 1.5 or 1.8 or 2.0 or 3.0, because normally it's not one path to upgrade. There could be 30 different roads to an upgrade. Which is the best road? We think of it as, I need to give you the Google Maps directions with traffic analysis to say here to here, take this route. It's the least risky and fastest for you to get there. So we build upgrade impact analysis. But, now let's say you have Jackson Data Bind, and there is no easy way to upgrade Jackson Data Bind. I'm sure many of the listeners here have Spring in their environment. Same problems, right? Your development team will say, well, this will take a year or 18 months. You have FedRAMP compliance that says you got to fix it in 30 days. What do you do? How do you rationalize this? So what we did is we learned based on all of this environment and infrastructure we had built for reachability analysis, for vulnerability prioritization, and upgrade impact analysis, that we can remove a fix from a new version of a library, backport it to the legacy version our customers are on, separate the security fix from the feature changes, and just bring the vulnerability fix as an Endor patch to you on the 5-year-old version of Jackson Data Bind you're on. I take your problem away. Engineers are happy because they don't have to migrate for the sake of migrating and appeasing security requirements. And you get your green bill of health because you eliminated the vulnerability. And you did this with as simple as developers pointing to the Endor Artifactory and basically picking up patches and versions from there, which are guaranteed to be non-breaking. So that's how we think about how to simplify the world of AppSec and make it fun again.
Yeah, no, I think this idea of impact assessment on behalf of engineers is super powerful in the sense that if as security team, if we want engineers to upgrade to a certain version, whatnot, yeah, I think holding the engineers accountable for that upgrade is obviously, leads to a lot of friction where, the culture sort of tends to suffer as compared to, if we provide the assessment to the engineer showing that, look, these are the different options. If you take a route 1, this is what you're going to get. I think I can see some value there. And I'm happy to see the Endor Labs is probably the only vendor, at least from my information, that can provide you that impact assessment. I think that is a feature that I would love to see more vendors have. So, yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. So, as a follow-up to that question, right, Varun, where do you see LLMs play a part in this entire, process of how you are thinking of solving the vulnerability management problem? In your experience and experimentation, from your team, what are some things that you think are really good use cases for LLMs to be used, and some cases where you feel like we still have quite a ways to mature?
Yeah, it's a great question. Before I answer that, I'll say now that you have, stated it publicly that this is a great feature. Watch out, in 3 months, every vendor will claim they have upgrade impact analysis. So good luck to everybody in AppSec now. But yes, coming back to LLMs, look, we've done a lot of research. Like I said, we're fortunate to have, dozen plus PhDs in this company, experts in program analysis and AI and stuff like that. And it's a topic that I think about waking up and go to bed about, where can we bring in AI to bring in the AI AppSec engineer, but whatever we call it, an accelerant to help you scale. Look, LLMs are very good at reasoning. They're very poor at finding things. And here's why. You kind of tell them to go find something, even if it doesn't exist, they will find it because they don't know how to say no. And the second thing is providing the whole context of your application, whether that context lives in Confluence and wiki pages or in Swagger documents and other things, is the most important thing to have. So there's a lot of startups out there that basically claim to be AI assistants, and you go peel under the hood, and what they do is they'll call a foundational model, Cohere, OpenAI, whatever, and they'll just pipe your pull request, get a result, and say that's the problem. And it's just not the right use case. I think the right balance is, let's not look at it as either AI or rules. I think it's a combination. You need a lot of rules and curation because, if you think about application and having an AST of an application and the context you could drive from there with certain rules. So my belief and how we are approaching this problem at Endor Labs is we take a broad spectrum of rules, pipe it, and get what is probably going to be lots of false positives in the data. But we don't expose that to customers. We then take that set information and then we reason with that with LLMs to basically do a lot of triage and false positive reduction process using LLMs, helping them help the explainability of it. And by the way, once we get to a good fidelity of information that we're ready to expose to the customer, also use LLMs to propose the best methodology to fix it, both in simple English, but also code snippets that people wanted. So I think it's a combination. You can't do it one way or the other entirely. I think there's the other bigger question in the industry, which is like dates me back to cloud. Like today, I think that the big unsolved piece is, are large enterprises going to accept vendors just piping their proprietary information, including their code, into our models? Or are you going to demand that we deploy these models in-house for you under your control and promise not to train our models in your data? So I think there's a lot of general policy and governance that needs to be figured out. I'll give you another example actually of a slightly unrelated problem, but let's think about a completely new avenue of issues we're going to have when AI generates software for us in our enterprise, right? License issues. So you asked for a prompt, it gave you code. You have no idea where the attribution is. Is it from an Elastic restricted library? Is it from a Apache, GPL license? Who knows? There's no attribution. So from a license governance perspective, the question is, how do I know? There's a second, even more interesting security problem here, which is I get 17 lines of code. These 17 lines of code are from a library, but there's no attribution. Like it's almost like vendoring the library because it didn't import something in my POM. I have the lines of code. Now, tomorrow there's a CVSS 10, like really bad vulnerability in that library. My SCA tool doesn't even know I have that library because it's not a library. It's pieces of code that are still vulnerable. So this falls in between an SCA and a SAST problem. Like neither tool solves it. It's a library vulnerability, but I have no library related to that in my inventory. How am I going to solve this? So, this is as a little bit different to your question. This is more of what happens when AI starts generating code, but we have these new emerging set of problems that we'll have to address. And obviously these are things that are top of mind for us.
Yeah.
I just have I just have one follow-up question to that. So you mentioned that LLMs are good at reasoning and they're not really that good at finding. However, we've seen companies like Expo, and I think there's another company I saw, ZeroPath, that they're actually finding CVEs in open source libraries and SDKs. So I think there's some aspect to LLMs where they can be good at finding stuff as well. So the example that you just gave, right, where if you're just kind of taking some lines of code from a vendor library, so your code or your system doesn't really know that you're importing it from a library, and also, the SaaS tool might not be able to find it. Do you feel like there is some potential for LLMs to find that vulnerability, even though your SCA or SaaS tooling is not capable enough to find those things?
Yes, and we are absolutely working on that, and we look forward to launching these capabilities in the new year.
Got it.
Cool. So just one last point. I know we're pretty running a little short on time. So I think as someone who's kind of operating in the space of the AI and security stuff, right? A couple of the points you made made a lot of sense. So one of them on the deployment aspect, I think I kind of feel like for a change, like AWS and Azure and Google Cloud has done a fantastic job at making it simpler to deploy commercial models on enterprise, on-prem, right? So I think that has been very exciting because when we started the company like 14 months ago, we had like a really hard time talking to companies about adopting our technology for the simple reason that they don't want to share their design documents and Confluence pages with us. But at the same time, we still have to kind of somehow run assessments on them, right? So I think there's a lot of really good cookie cutter solutions available now, but there's still a lot of work to be done on the education piece because CISOs are still worried about this, right? Though actually the CTOs are not, because they kind of understand kind of how the technology works. But you make a reasonable point that, policy needs to catch up. The other interesting point you made about licensing is really interesting. From what I understand, there are companies like IBM who are kind of betting big on saying, hey, we'll give you smaller models, usually called SLMs, which are purpose-driven for certain use cases, but they guarantee the licensing on everything that's learned from there. So they basically say, hey, everything this model is trained on is essentially going to be something where we can attribute the license to a particular thing, and then there's no licensing issues, right? I haven't seen them in production. I don't know how practical it is to do that, right? But I think you hit the nail on the head, right? So somewhere we've kind of, as an industry, made a trade-off saying, hey, we'll just ignore the whole licenses and the attribution part and just go with the fastest execution part. And I don't know where it's going to lead us. But I hope there are companies who are thinking on the other way as well, and see if we can find a nice little middle path where attribution also happens, and at the same time we are able to generate top class code.
Yeah, I think this is all kind of problems in the space of AI code governance. I think just like any technology transformation that happens, that technology transformation starts ahead, and then security catches up and governance catches up. And
So
I think we're going to be seeing just that here in this space as well. Yes, a lot of people are using GitHub Copilots and producing a lot of code. Still questionable, is it production ready code or not? But regardless, a lot of code's getting produced. The biggest investment area right now in the last 12 months from VCs have been on AI copilots for software development. So, more and more is going to come, and we just have to kind of catch up and make sure that we undo to your point, like threat model this stuff. What's going to be the set of problems? A couple I gave examples of, and find the best ways to kind of embrace the technology without being a blocker in security.
Okay. Well, on that positive note, thank you very much, Varun, for joining us. We had a great conversation, and good luck with everything at Endor.
Thank you, Varun.
Yeah, I enjoyed the chat. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. If you like the show, please share this with your friends and colleagues. If you have any questions or comments, you can reach Anshuman on Twitter at Anshuman_BH. That's ANSHUMAN_BH. And me, Sandesh, at Jubba on Jeans. That's JUBBAONJEANS. See you next time.